Hello everyone, it's Thumper the Rabid Rabbit back for another episode of Rust Electricity 101, the Component Guide. Today we're going to cover rechargeable batteries. I'm going to cover both the large and small rechargeable batteries in this episode and simply call out the differences as we go. First, let's take a look at the small rechargeable battery. Small rechargeable battery costs 10 high-qual metal, is found in crates and sunken chests, and is fairly common among the rest of the electrical components. The large battery costs 50 high-qual metal. It is a bit harder to find, especially in a common chest, although it does appear rarely. They're much more likely to be found in higher tier loot crates. One of the things that you can note from this description here is that batteries will not provide power to an output if their charge is less than 5 seconds, and the charge rate is dependent on the amount of input power with a maximum efficiency of 80%, and I'll get into a little bit more detail about that later. I'm going to spawn one of each of these batteries. First of all, the small battery does not rotate. It always places with its terminals towards you. So in this case, I'm going to face away from the wall so that the terminals are towards the wall. The large battery, by contrast, also cannot be rotated, but its terminals spawn away from you. So I'm going to face the wall when I place this so that its terminals are towards the wall. You can see here I have a power in handle and a power out handle, as well as a power in and a power out on this battery as well. So there's two differences between the abilities of these batteries. They both do spawn with a 2-minute default charge, so that's similar, but where they differ is the small battery can hold a maximum of a 15-minute charge. The large battery can hold a maximum of a 4-hour charge, so significantly more. The small battery has a limit to its input and output terminal of 10 units of power, so it's good for powering a few devices and maybe a handful of lights, but not much more than that. The large battery has an input and output maximum of 100 units. So this is a lot more handy when you're building power around your base, especially for trap bases and bases that use a lot of electrical devices. Alright, behaviorally, the important thing to know about how batteries work in Rust is that they do not behave like a battery in the real world. They don't have an amount of power that they're filled up with, like milliamp hours. Instead, they act like a wind-up clock. When you connect a load, any load, and I mean any load, whether it's 1 unit of power, or 10 units, or 50 units, or 100 units, any load of power connected to either type of battery will start the charge timer counting down in real time. So watch as I connect this output to a load, in this case, this counter, and you will see that the timer starts counting down. 156, 55, 54, and so forth. It will continue to count down regardless of the amount of load on the battery in real time until the battery is exhausted, which will happen in 2 minutes of real time. There are only 2 components as of today, January 22nd, 2019, that do not constitute a load on the battery and will not cause it to start counting down. If I connect this battery to a switch, a regular manual switch, in the off position, it will not use power. It does not constitute a load. The timer does not count down. Additionally, the blocker, when it is in a blocked state, meaning there is power coming to the block pass-through input on the side, then it is considered an off device and it does not consume any power, therefore it is not a load. Bam. 1 minute 30 seconds, and it is not counting down. As of right now, the only 2 components in the game that you can put after batteries that will not cause them to discharge are the blocker and the switch. If you put a root combiner, a AND switch, an OR switch, a timer, a display, anything else connected to these batteries, they will discharge. Now, let's get back to that 80% efficiency description. What does that mean? What it means is, on these batteries, if you wish to charge them, they will only charge at 80% of the maximum input rate. So for example, I have a whole lot of power up here left over. I'm going to take off of this branch and I'm going to bring it down here to charge this battery. I'm putting 325 units of power to this little battery. However, it still has a maximum input of 10 units. So everything past 10 is a waste. It will not charge any faster if you apply power over 10 units. Everything over 10 is a waste. Below 10 will make a difference, but above 10 is a waste. On the large battery, 100 units of input power is maximum. Anything over 100 units of power will not make this charge any faster. Do not bother putting more than 100 units of power into a large battery. It is a waste. Okay. Now, where the 80% comes in is if you are charging this battery at full input power. So if I take this 300 and I plug it into this large battery here, it can only use 100. But that 100 will cause the battery to charge at 80% efficiency, or 80% of real time. So this clock does not count up in real time. It counts up at 80% of real time. So if I were to let this run for 10 minutes, you would see that this battery only adds 8 minutes of charge time. If I let it run for 100 minutes, it will only add 80 minutes of charge time. It will only add 80% of its charge. That's where the 80% limit, efficiency limit, comes in. It is relative to the amount of power that you are putting into the battery. For example, if you put 50 units of power into this battery instead of the maximum 100, it will only charge at half the rate. So rather than adding 80 minutes out of 100, it will only add 40 minutes out of 100 because you're only putting in 50% of the maximum power that it can take. So it does matter how much power you put in up to the maximum. So if you can, put 10 units into the small battery and put 100 into the large battery if you want them to charge at their maximum rate, which is only 80% of real time. Now, here's where things get really tricky. You cannot charge a battery while it is under load. You can slow it down, but you cannot charge it. The reason for that is that the output doesn't care about what the load is. If it did, you could potentially put more power in than you're taking out, but right now today, and honestly a lot of us would consider this a bug, the output load doesn't matter. So that means this thing is ticking down in real time. However, because I have more than 10 units coming in here, or 10 units or more coming in here, it is also simultaneously ticking up at 80% of real time, which means we're actually observing a 20% net loss of time remaining on the battery. Another way of saying that would be, in a 10-minute period, the output will burn 10 minutes off the clock, but the input will at the same time add 8 minutes to the clock, meaning that the clock will only go down by 2 minutes total over that 10-minute period. Same thing on the large battery. If you want to use a larger number, it will burn 100 minutes when it's running for 100 minutes, but if you have 100 units of power or more coming in, it will add 80 minutes in that same period of time, meaning it will only lose a net 20 minutes off of the clock during that 100 minutes of runtime if you're fully charging it and discharging at the same time. I know that's confusing. It gets a lot of people lost. I hope you can follow that. But the long and short of it is, if you have input power and a load, this battery and this battery will both eventually go dead. You cannot prevent that if there is a load. Anytime you design a circuit, and I will post other videos that describe this and examples in detail, you should always have a circuit that cuts off the load when it is not needed, either using a switch or a blocker. That will allow your battery timer to actually tick up and add to its capacity, because if you remove or turn off the load, then it can charge all the way back up because it is not losing power at the same time. Alright, I know that's a lot to cover, and this is one of the longer video segments that I've done. But just to recap, small battery has a limit of 10 in, 10 out, and a 15-minute charge time. Large battery has a maximum of 100 in, 100 out, and a 4-hour charge time. Smaller battery is cheaper and a little easier to find. The larger battery, more expensive, a little more difficult to find. They act like a clock, not like a traditional battery. They will always count down in real time when there is any load on the battery. Any load at all, unless you are using a switch or a blocker in its off state, which are not counted as loads. Everything else counts as a load. And when you are charging, it only charges at 80% efficiency. So even if you are providing the maximum allowed input power to the battery, while it is under load, it will still discharge, just not quite as fast. I hope that's enough information to get you all started on using batteries. Look for the additional videos I have online already, and some that I'll be posting in the future to describe this in more detail. And of course, if you have specific scenarios, I'm always willing to address those as well. So that, my friends, just about covers rechargeable, magical batteries in the universe of Rust.